It started with a joke, not a cruel one, not exactly, just a casual comment made in a quiet Oxford dining hall. Filipino food, isn't that just sweet spaghetti? The room chuckled, but across the long wooden table, beneath centuries-old portraits and stained glass windows that had seen empires rise and fall, a Filipino graduate student smiled politely and said nothing. He had heard it before, and he had brought something with him. A single dish, carefully wrapped, carefully prepared, cooked the way his grandmother taught him. Slow, patient, unapologetically bold. Outside, the bells of Oxford echoed across cobblestone streets. Inside, the conversation drifted back to economics, politics, literature. No one expected food to interrupt history, but it did. He waited until the debate quieted, until forks rested, until curiosity made space. Then he stood. "I brought something from home," he said softly. There was no dramatic speech, no rehearsed defense of culture, just a quiet offering. The lid came off. Steam rose gently into the Oxford air. Garlic, vinegar, bay leaves, peppercorn, a scent unfamiliar to most in the room, but confident. Chicken adobo, the unofficial national dish of the Philippines. A meal born from trade, colonization, survival, Spanish technique, indigenous instinct. A recipe that doesn't measure, it feels. Someone leaned forward, another raised an eyebrow. One student whispered, "It smells strong." He nodded. "It's meant to." They laughed lightly. He served small portions, no pressure, no speech about colonial history, no lecture about Southeast Asian gastronomy, just food. The first forkful was cautious. Oxford is not easily impressed. It is a place built on skepticism. The first bite landed. Silence. Not awkward silence, not polite silence, but the kind that happens when the brain is trying to process something it did not expect. Savory, sharp, tender, complex. A flavor profile that didn't beg for approval. It demanded understanding. One student blinked. Another slowly put their fork down. "What is that?" Someone finally asked. "Adobo," he replied. "But it's not just sour," another said. "It's layered." He nodded again. "Because that's the thing about adobo. It isn't loud in appearance. It's brown, humble, almost ordinary looking. It doesn't perform visually. It performs on the tongue." The discussion that followed wasn't about taste. It was about history. How did this develop? Why vinegar? Why soy sauce? He explained how the Philippines preserved food before refrigeration. How vinegar wasn't just flavor, it was survival. How soy sauce arrived through Chinese traders. How Spanish colonizers named it but did not invent it. 1,000 years of trade routes in one pot. Oxford listened. And for a moment, the hierarchy of knowledge shifted. The Filipino student wasn't the one answering questions about Western theory. They were answering questions about home. Someone asked if all Filipino food tasted like this. He smiled. "No," he said. "That's the point." He spoke about sinigang, sour and comforting. He spoke about lechon, celebration on a plate. He spoke about kare-kare, thick, peanut-rich, deeply Filipino. But adobo was different. Adobo was the entry point. It doesn't shock you. It stays with you. A professor, who had remained silent most of the evening, finally spoke. "It's remarkable," she said, "how something so simple can feel sophisticated." He didn't correct her. But adobo isn't simple. It just refuses to look complicated. The conversation shifted again. Someone admitted they had never tried Filipino food before. Another said they didn't even know what language was spoken in the Philippines. He answered patiently. Filipino, English, Tagalog, over 180 languages. The room grew quieter. Not because they were uncomfortable, because they were realizing how little they knew. That's what food does. It bypasses pride. It bypasses academic ego. It enters through the senses. By the end of the evening, the pot was empty. One student asked for the recipe. He laughed. "There isn't one." Confused faces. "My grandmother never measured," he explained. "You taste, you adjust, you feel when it's right." Oxford likes measurements. Adobo prefers instinct. Days later, something unexpected happened. An email circulated among the faculty dining group. Filipino dinner night? Curiosity had turned into invitation. What started as a quiet offering became a small event. More dishes arrived this time. Pancit, lumpia, bibingka, The hall that once chuckled now waited eagerly. And this time, there were no jokes, only anticipation. One British student admitted something quietly during dessert. I think we sometimes assume Western cuisine is the standard. He nodded. It wasn't accusation. It was awareness. Food has a way of leveling rooms built on tradition. Oxford has centuries of prestige. But prestige cannot shield you from flavor. That night, no one was debating whose culture was superior. They were debating which Filipino dish they liked best. And in that shift, subtle, almost invisible, something powerful happened. Representation doesn't always arrive through speeches. Sometimes it arrives in a clay pot. Sometimes it smells like vinegar and garlic. Sometimes it looks ordinary, but makes a room built on history fall completely silent. The student walked home through narrow Oxford streets later that evening. No applause followed him. No headlines were written. But something had changed. Not the university, not the world, just a room. And sometimes that's enough. Because the next time someone mentions Filipino food in that hall, they won't think of sweet spaghetti. They'll remember the silence. The kind that comes right after the first bite. And in that silence, a country was understood. Not through textbooks, but through taste. And maybe that's how culture truly travels. Not through conquest, not through curriculum, but through courage. One dish, one table, one quiet moment that made Oxford listen.